Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Ka. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group where we study the words of the Buddha. In this program, we're exploring volumes 2 through 13 of our book series, helping students to be able to kind of fill in their framework, because all the other programs that we share help you to kind of build a foundation or a framework, and then this program helps you to fill that in with all the words of the Buddha. Where all the other programs I teach in a more traditional method of teaching for 15, 20, 30 minutes, and then opening up for questions and teaching another 15, 20, 30 minutes and opening up for questions. In this program, what I do is I invite students in Zoom to be able to read a chapter from our book. And then after someone reads a chapter, I will share some teachings on that. Then I'm going to open up to any and all questions that you might have, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. You can put those in the comment section, or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any and all questions that you like. We're in volume 5, which is titled The First Stage of Enlightenment, Stream Enterer, and we're going to be studying chapters 11 through 20 today. We're going to be diving into dependent origination and spending some time with that. This is a teaching that's the highest, most ultimate truth of the teachings of the Buddha, and you would need to be able to learn this and understand it in order to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment, among other things. And oftentimes students don't understand this the first time that they learn it, and it takes multiple times to be able to learn it and understand it, and that's fine. Take your time with it. There's no rush and there's no expectation that you would understand it from the beginning. So I'm going to turn this over to you guys and see if there's someone who would like to volunteer to read this first chapter. It looks like Pat. Go ahead, sir. And then Lyndon will come to you on the next one.
The complete destruction of three fetters. With the complete destruction of three fetters, he is a 7 times at most attainer who, after roaming and wandering on among heavenly beings and humans 7 times at most, makes an end of discontentedness. With the complete destruction of three fetters, he is a family-to-family attainer who, after roaming and wandering on among wholesome families 2 or 3 times, makes an end of discontentedness. With the complete destruction of 3 fetters, he is a one-seed attainer who, after being reborn once more in human existence, makes an end of discontentedness. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pat. So when we think about a stream enterer, someone who's in the first stage of enlightenment, we definitely understand that they need to eliminate the first 3 fetters, those first 3 pollutions of personal existence view, doubt, wrong behavior, and observances. There's a bunch of other things that a person who, by the time they get to the first stage of enlightenment, would have developed and cultivated as part of their practice. But these are the main things that they actually have eliminated, these 3 fetters. But there's other things too that an individual would need. And also, when we think about a stream enterer, we just think about a stream enterer. But there's actually these 3 different types of stream enterers that the Buddha is talking about here. This is the level of detail that the Buddha is teaching at during his lifetime. And you can learn this if you'd like, but it really isn't as significant as all the things that the Buddha is going to teach you about how to get into the first stage of enlightenment. This is just kind of like a more granular way of looking at an individual who's in the first stage of enlightenment. And you wouldn't necessarily know whether you're one of these or not, but the Buddha is helping you to be able to see this level of detail. That there could be someone who's a stream enterer who just got into that stage of enlightenment, and what he's saying here is that this individual would be reborn a maximum of 7 times. If they died in that existence as being in the first stage of enlightenment, they would be reborn a maximum of 7 times. They would continue to be reborn amongst humans and heavenly beings before they ultimately make their way into the fourth stage of enlightenment, where they would actually experience the elimination of discontentedness. Now, if you die as a stream enter in the first stage of enlightenment, you're going to come back into the human world. But here the Buddha is explaining that someone who has gotten into the first stage of enlightenment, they will be reborn a maximum of 7 times through the heavenly world in the human world. The reason why is because, let's just say you get into the first stage of enlightenment and you die, you're going to come back into the human world. But now let's just say you make your way to the third stage of enlightenment, where you're in the stage of non-returner. And then you die in that stage, and now you're reborn into the heavenly world, and that's where you get to enlightenment. So that's why the Buddha is explaining it this way, that there's the potential for heavenly existences and human existences within those 7 lives that an individual may end up incurring as a way to be able to get to enlightenment. There's also a type of stream enter who, yes, has eliminated the first 3 fetters, but now this individual is going to be reborn among families, certain wholesome families, affluent families, 2 or 3 more times, and then they're going to experience enlightenment in one of those existences. And then the same thing is this third type of stream enterer is an individual who's gotten into the first stage of enlightenment, and they're what's called a one-seed attainer, who, after being reborn one more time in the human world, will actually make the end of discontentedness, getting to enlightenment. So let's just say someone gets to the first stage of enlightenment and they die, and then they are reborn into the human world. They get back to the first stage of enlightenment and they die, and then they get back to the next life. They get back to the first stage of enlightenment and they die. But now when they come back and they make their way to the first stage of enlightenment on that fourth existence, now when they die in that existence, now maybe they're a one-seed attainer, meaning that they're going to come back into the world one more time, and now they're going to get to the fourth stage of enlightenment as an enlightened being in that 5th existence. This is just an example. This isn't the way that it would have to happen, but this is what a one-seed attainer is, that by the time they make their way back into the world, they are going to get to enlightenment in that very next existence from the human realm. It's almost like a once-returner, but they've actually are doing it from the first stage of enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have here. There's really nothing for you to practice here. It's more about information that's just helping you understand how the Buddha is delineating and distinguishing individuals, people who are in the stream enter the first stage of enlightenment. It looks like Lyndon has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Teacher David. I have a question regarding what is the mental state for the stream enter when they reborn? Are they when they born, they don't have the 3 feathers at all, or they still have it, and then they like the normal people, they have to continue even though they kind of their destiny is the end of the contentedness, but they still have the 3 feathers at the life, and then they will need to practice and then to get to the end of the end of the discontentedness.
Sure. So when you die in any of the stages of enlightenment, in terms of the first, second, and third stage, you're going to be reborn. And when you're reborn, you're going to have all the same fetters as you're reborn back into the world. It's just that you have residual memories from your previous lives that's going to make it more straightforward for you to get back to either the first stage of enlightenment or beyond, if that's what you're going to end up doing. It's not your destiny. It's not that you're destined, that someone's predetermined it. It's just that the fact that an individual has done a certain amount of work in one life, when they're experiencing coming back into the world in their new existence, those residual memories that they have from their previous life are going to be in this new mind, and now they're going to more readily find the teachings in that next life. Oftentimes people who are finding the teachings very early in life, they have practiced the teachings in a previous life, Or if you found the teachings at whatever age in this life and you find them to be pretty straightforward, pretty easily adopted into your development as an individual, this is an individual who most likely practiced the teachings in a previous life, but they are starting over from the beginning. It's just that the fetters are not as predominant, they're not as strong, and you're more easily make your way back to the teachings. And once you find the teachings, it's more easy for you to practice them and make progress from there. As opposed to someone who's never practiced these teachings ever in a previous life, when they find the teachings in their current life, they'll find it very cumbersome and very challenging to be able to learn and practice because they've never seen the teachings before.
Got it. Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, if anybody in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom has a question, you can put that in the comment section, or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand, unmute your microphone, and ask any and all questions that you like. So I don't see any other questions. Just as a heads up, because I know we have a bunch of new people on Facebook and YouTube that are watching, what you have in these books is you have the words of the Buddha, you have a reference that takes you back to the original source teachings in the Pali Canon, and then you've got words from me that are helping you to be able to integrate this into your life and understand how it connects to other teachings of the Buddha. You can access these from our website at buddhadailywisdom.com, and you can click on free books. You can download it for free and use it. You can take it and go print it if you like. You can get printed versions online through Amazon, or if you're ever here in Chiang Mai, Thailand, you can get them at the temple by just reimbursing us for the printing cost. So each of these chapters are going to help you to be able to gradually learn the teachings of the Buddha based in his original words. So Lyndon, you would like to read this next one?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Abandoning 6 things one is capable of realizing accomplishment in view. Monks, without having abandoned 6 things, one is incapable of realizing accomplishment in view. What 6? Personal existence view, doubt, wrong behavior, and observance. Craving leading to the plane of misery. Anger leading to the plane of misery, and ignorance, unknowing of the true reality leading to the plane of misery. Without having abandoned these 6 things, one is incapable of realizing accomplishment in view. Monks, having abandoned 6 things, one is capable of realizing accomplishment in view. What 6? Personal existence view, doubt, wrong behavior, and observance. Craving leading to the plane of misery, and anger leading to the plane of misery, and ignorance, unknown of the true reality leading to the plane of misery. Having abandoned these 6 things, one is capable of realizing accomplishment in view. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. So you guys might be familiar with establishing right view. That's something that you learn in the foundational teachings. What that is the very first teaching of the Buddha, where you're understanding the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths in those 4 simple statements explain to you the problem in the mind, the cause, the elimination, and the path forward. This is helping you to get established in right view. And what you learn there is you learn that it's your own mind that's causing all the discontent feelings, that it's craving, desire, attachment. And you can independently verify and see that for yourself, that it's not other people who are causing you to be angry or frustrated or irritated or annoyed or other things like this, that it's physically impossible for someone to insert a feeling into your mind. So you start to learn that as part of the Four Noble Truths and establishing right view. Because when you have wrong view, you will blame other people for the feelings that you experience. And you will never get to enlightenment, where you'll eliminate your discontent feelings by blaming others, because you'll just be trying to push people away with aversion. You'll be bitter, harsh, and hostile to people, or you'll put your expectations on people and try to pressure them into doing things your way. And you'll never get to peace and joy, the end of discontentedness, that way. So you first establish right view. That's the very first teaching of the Buddha. But then as you get closer and closer to the first stage of enlightenment, you need to get to the point where you have accomplishment in view. And what you're going to see throughout this book is there's multiple discourses that are going to help you to understand what accomplishment in view is, because this is beyond just establishing right view. This is accomplishment in view. So this is just one discourse of multiple discourses that are going to help you to understand how to get to accomplishment in view. So here, an individual to get to accomplishment in view will need to eliminate the first three fetters. And I've taught these at different times in various courses. I'm pleased to go over these with you guys again if you would like, where you can understand these. If you have any questions on what these are or how to eliminate them, please let me know here, or any of the other methods that I help you guys, because you need to be able to understand what each of these fetters are, what the symptoms of them are, how to eliminate them, and how to know that you've actually eliminated them. That's an important aspect of being able to eliminate these and get to accomplishment in view, where you'll be experiencing the first stage of enlightenment. Then there's this elimination of craving, anger, and ignorance to the point where it will no longer lead to the plane of misery. What this is that you haven't completely eliminated craving, anger, and ignorance by the time you've gotten to accomplishment in view into the first stage of enlightenment. You haven't completely eliminated craving, anger, and ignorance until the mind is actually enlightened. That's where it's completely eliminated. But you've reduced it significantly to the point where what is still in your mind, it will no longer lead to being reborn into the lower realms of hell, the animal realm, or the realm of afflicted spirits, which are ghosts. If you think about how we function in the unenlightened mind when we don't understand these teachings and we have massive amounts of craving, anger, and ignorance in the mind, we function very much like animals. We are not animals, we are human beings, but in the unenlightened state with a significant amount of craving, anger, and ignorance, we'll function like animals. We will fight to death almost, right? Like when you get in an argument with your life partner or some other person, it's almost like a fight to death where you're yelling and hollering and screaming and trying to convince the other person that you're right and they're wrong, and you might even pick things up and throw it and be aggressive and hostile and bitter. It's like a wild animal, right? But by the time you've reduced your craving, anger, and ignorance to a certain degree, you're now functioning as a better and better human being. And that's what it is to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment. And that's why if you die in the first stage of enlightenment, you will come back into the human world, because you're no longer functioning like an animal. So you're not going to be reborn into the lower realms. So an individual who's reduce their craving, anger, and ignorance to a certain degree where they won't be reborn into the plane of misery, they've reduced it to the point where they're now functioning as a better and better human being, that they don't have a significant amount of craving, anger, and ignorance in their mind. And that's what the Buddha is saying that you need in order to be able to get to this accomplishment in view. But there's other things that you need as well, not just these 6 here that he's talking about. Because remember, you need to always look at the Buddha's teachings in totality. You're never interested in looking at them in isolation. If you just see this particular discourse, you might think this is the only thing that you need. If the Buddha was saying that this is the only thing that you would need, he would say that in the discourse. But you'll see additional discourses, approximately about 6 more discourses, that's going to give you additional information of what needs to occur in order to get to accomplishment in view. So let me know what questions you guys have here on chapter 12. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. So if you have questions on these fetters, or if you have questions on craving, anger, and ignorance, let me know and I will help you. Okay, we have a question here on YouTube. The question is, what is wrong behavior and observances? So this is the third fetter, the third pollution of mind. This is where an individual has a certain amount of unwise moral conduct. That's the wrong behavior part. And as long as you're putting out wrong behavior, where you're making unwise decisions about the way you choose to interact with others, it's going to produce harm, and therefore harm is going to come back to you. But by the time you've eliminated wrong behavior, you're now practicing right speech, right action, and right livelihood to the first level of detail in the Eightfold Path. So, for example, for right speech, that would be an individual has eliminated lying, slander, harsh speech, and frivolous speech. They won't be practicing the 5 factors of well-spoken speech perfectly yet, but they'll be practicing those things perfectly to have eliminated wrong behavior. They also will have eliminated the first 3 aspects of wrong action, which is they would have eliminated killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. They won't be doing those things anymore. But there's still other behaviors that they might be doing, some minor things. And then they will have purified their livelihood to the point of the first fold of purification, where they won't be doing business in weapons, living beings, meat, substances that cause heedlessness, and poisons. And they also won't be doing any scheming, flattering, hinting, belittling, or pursuing gain with gain. This is part of the Eightfold Path, and I teach those things in detail as part of the Eightfold Path. What wrong observances is where somebody's mind thinks that it's rites, rituals, ceremonies, worship that is actually going to lead to improvement in their life, that someone might be involved in those things and doing those things, either experiencing it as a receiver or actually doing it as a practitioner, where they haven't understood the number one problem that the Buddha discovered in the mind, which you guys are going to learn about as part of dependent origination, which is the lack of wisdom or the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality. That's the number one problem. So the number one solution is the cultivation of wisdom. So that's why you need to learn, examine, and investigate the Buddha's teachings, reflect on them to verify whether they're true or false, and then practice them, because that's where you actually cultivate the wisdom, is through your practice. So if an individual is practicing wrong observances, they will actually be thinking that this water that's being sprinkled on you is somehow going to magically improve your life, or this string that is being tied on your wrist is somehow going to magically improve your life. But if you've eliminated wrong observances, your mind understands this is not going to help you to cultivate wisdom. So there's no amount of water that I can sprinkle on you that's going to improve your relationships. There's no amount of strings that I can tie on your wrist that is going to improve your career. It's the cultivation of wisdom and better decision making, discernment, which is actually going to improve what you experience in the condition of your mind in your day-to-day life. So whether an individual actually does any kind of rites, rituals, ceremonies, or worship, that's a choice for them to make. But if an individual has eliminated wrong observances, they, at least in their mind, will understand that these things aren't actually leading to any beneficial results, because they will understand dependent origination, and they will understand that ignorance is the number one problem. So therefore, it's the cultivation of wisdom that's going to improve that. So that's what wrong behavior and observances are. Looks like Alberto has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, David. Hi, everyone. I have one question regarding personal existence view. So how do you know that you've eliminated personal existence view, not at the intellectual level, but, on your daily life?
The way you'll know is that when certain situations happen that could have triggered personal existence view, there's no arising of discontentedness, not even the slightest little ickiness. So if I said, "Wow, Alberto, you are so handsome. That red shirt really brings out the colors of your eyes. You are just a magnificent man." And if you notice like pleasant feelings coming up, you know that there's still personal existence view. Or if somebody said the opposite of what I just said, like a degrading, diminishing, type of speech to you about this physical appearance, then you would know that if there's no discontentedness there, then you would know that personal existence view has been eliminated. But you need to have multiple experiences of this, because remember, the mind could be clinging to the self-image, but it could also be clinging to the self-identity. So if somebody says something about your nationality or your culture, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, if somebody says something about professors and they say degrading or disparaging things or agreeable things, and you don't notice that your mind shifts or changes at all. Anything about your sports teams, right? Maybe you have identity through your sports teams that you cheer for and all these different things. You would notice that even when people say agreeable or disagreeable things about any of these types of things, there's no triggering of discontentedness, not even the slightest ickiness in the mind.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And by the way, there's other things too. Alberto, I just gave you kind of the short and skinny of it right there. I teach this in August as a class. I teach for about an hour and a half everything about personal existence view. And I go through a lot more detail of how to know that personal existence view has been eliminated. So if you haven't seen one of those recordings, you might decide to look at that because I talk about it in more detail.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, I don't see any other questions anywhere. So let's go to the next chapter, which is chapter 13, which is kind of like a little bit of a lead up to chapter 14, where we're going to study dependent origination. So it looks like Marcy would like to read this one. Go ahead, ma'am.
The stream enter understands as they really are the cause and the passing away of the world. Monks, without having abandoned 6 things, one is incapable of realizing accomplishment in view. Monks, and an instructed noble disciple does not think, when what exists, does what come to be? With the arising of what, does what arise? When what exists, do volitional formations, choices, decisions come to be? When what exists, does consciousness come to be? When what exists, does name and form come to be? When what exists, does 6 senses base come to be? When what exists, does contact come to be? When what exists, does feelings come to be? When what exists, does craving come to be? When what exists, does clinging come to be? And when what exists, does birth come to be? And what exists, does aging and death come to be? Rather, monks, an instructed noble disciple has wisdom about this that is dependent of others. When this exists, that comes to be. With the rising of this, that arises. When there is ignorance, volitional formation, choices, decisions come to be. When there are volitional formations, consciousness comes to be. When there is consciousness, name and form comes to be. When there is name and form, the 6 sense bases come to be. When there are the 6 sense bases, contact comes to be. When there is contact, feeling come to be. When there is feeling, craving comes to be. When there is craving, clinging comes to be. When there is clinging, existence comes to be. When there is existence, birth comes to be. And when there is birth, aging and death comes to be. He understands thus. In such a way, is there a cause and effect in the world? Monks, an instructed noble disciple does not think, when what does not exist, does what not come to be? With the elimination of what is what eliminated? When what does not exist, do volitional formations, choices, decisions not come to be? When what does not exist, does consciousness come to be? When what does not exist, does name and form not come to be? When what does not exist, do the 6 sense spaces not come to be? When what does not exist, does contact come to be? When what does not exist, does feelings not come to be? When what does not exist, does craving not come to be? When what does not exist, does clinging come to be? When what does not exist, does existence not come to be? When what does not exist, does birth not come to be? When what does not exist, does aging and death not come to be? Rather, monks, the instructed noble disciple has wisdom about this that is independent of others. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the elimination of this, that is eliminated. When there is no ignorance, volitional formations, choices, and decisions do not come to be. When there are no volitional formations, consciousness does not come to be. When there is no consciousness, name and form does not come to be. When there is no name and form, the 6 sense bases do not come to be. When there are no 6 sense bases, contact does not come to be. When there are no contact, feeling does not come to be. When there is no feeling, craving does not come to be. When there is no craving, clinging does not come to be. When there is no clinging, existence does not come to be. When there is no existence, birth does not come to be. When there is no birth, aging and death does not come to be. He understands thus. In such a way, the world is eliminated. He understands thus. In such a way, the world is eliminated. Monks, when a noble disciple thus understands as they really are the cause and the passing away of the world, he is then called a noble disciple who is accomplished in view, who is accomplished in vision, who has arrived at these true teachings, who sees these true teachings, who possesses a trainee's wisdom, who possesses a trainee's true wisdom, and has entered the stream of the teaching, a noble one with penetrative wisdom, one who understands squarely before the door to the deathlessness, enlightenment.
All right. Thank you, Marcy. Okay, so there's kind of a warm up for dependent origination here. The first thing that the Buddha is saying is, this is a lead in from the previous discourse where he's saying, okay, without having abandoned those 6 things, one is incapable of realizing accomplishment in view. The things that we were just talking about previously: personal existence view, doubt, wrong behavior and observances, the craving, anger, and ignorance leading to the plane of misery. Then he says, monks, an instructed noble disciple, which, if you're not familiar, when he talks about a noble disciple, he's saying someone who's practicing the teachings closely, does not think, when what exists, does what come to be. With the arising of what, does what arise. They don't think this way because they already know. That's why they don't think this way. They already know what leads to all these things because a noble disciple understands dependent origination. If you understand dependent origination, when what comes to exist, does what come to be, you don't think about that because you already know. It's already in the mind. With the arising of what, does what arise, you don't think about that because you already know the answer to this. You've already penetrated into it and you deeply understand it. But when someone is not a noble disciple, meaning they haven't studied and penetrated the teachings closely, they will be unfamiliar with this and they will think, well, when what arises, does what come to be? And with the arising of what, does what arise? They would be confused about that. They would lack wisdom about that. So when the Buddha also talks about an individual who's accomplished in view and a noble disciple, this is someone who's in the first stage of enlightenment. He doesn't call it out here specifically, but if you understand his other teachings, you'll understand that a person who's accomplished in view and is a noble disciple, this would be someone who's in the first stage of enlightenment. So now he walks through dependent origination in this question format, which you're going to be able to see the actual dependent origination here in a moment in the next chapter. So he walks through dependent origination. He says, rather, the instructed noble disciple has wisdom about this that is independent of others, meaning regardless of what other people think and what other people talk about, you know the truth about this. When this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. And now he kind of goes through dependent origination and, this other format. You'll see it here in a moment in its actual true format. So he walks through dependent origination here. And he says he understands thus, in such a way, there is a cause and effect in the world. Because what dependent origination is ultimately going to teach you is what are the cause and effect conditions that lead to birth, aging, death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. How is it that you keep coming back into this world over and over and over again? And how is it that you actually experience discontentedness? The Four Noble Truths gives you a window into understanding dependent origination, that you understand that it's craving, desire, attachment that is the cause of all discontentedness. That's the answer. Like if you were going to have a math problem, craving, desire, attachment being the cause of discontentedness, that's like the answer. But if the teacher was like, show me your work, well, dependent origination is show me the work. It's the detailed steps of exactly what leads to discontentedness and continuous rebirth. So if you understand dependent origination, you understand this cause and effect in the world of what leads to rebirth over and over and over again, because this is one of the things that you've studied and penetrated into to verify, to know that the cycle of rebirth is 100% the truth. So a instructed noble disciple does not think when what does not exist, does what not come to be. With the elimination of what is what eliminated, because you already understand because of dependent origination, which we're going to study here in a moment. Rather, the instructed noble disciple has wisdom about this that is independent of others. They understand when this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the elimination of this, that is eliminated. Because your ultimate goal on the path to enlightenment is to dismantle dependent origination, completely and utterly destroy it. This is what's going on within your own mind and within this stream of continuous existences over and over again. When you dismantle dependent origination, the mind is actually enlightened. You're outside of the cycle of rebirth and you're experiencing the peace and joy of the enlightened mental state. And that's what the Buddha gets to down here. He says, monks, when a noble disciple thus understands as they really are the cause and the passing away of the world, which is dependent origination, he is then called a noble disciple who is accomplished in view, which you're going to need other things besides this, like we've been talking about, to be able to get to accomplishment in view, but this is just one of those things. Who is accomplished in vision, meaning you can see clearly exactly how this world is being experienced by beings over and over and over again. Who has arrived at these true teachings, meaning that you've penetrated into the true teachings, and who sees the true teachings because you verified dependent origination. And this is why it's going to most likely take you time. It's not going to be just in this class that you necessarily are able to do that. Who has possessing of trainees' wisdom, right? That now with this understanding of dependent origination, you'll know clearly what you need to do. If you don't already know what you need to do on the path to enlightenment in order to get to enlightenment, by the time you understand dependent origination, this highest ultimate truth, you will know clearly what you need to do. So that's why it's a trainee's wisdom, that now you have what you need to be able to make your way to enlightenment in terms of understanding the ultimate goal. Who possesses this trainee's wisdom, and who has entered the stream of the teachings, because now this is a big step into the first stage of enlightenment. A noble one with penetrative wisdom, because you'll have that wisdom of dependent origination to understand how to walk forward. One who stands squarely before the door to the deathless, right? So the person hasn't entered the door, meaning they've gotten to enlightenment, but they're standing squarely at the door, prepared. Last class, I was talking about getting to the base camp of Mount Everest. You haven't gotten to the summit yet, but you're prepared. You've got everything you need to be able to get to the summit, but you just haven't made your way to enlightenment yet. So the Buddha is describing it here as one who stands squarely before the door to the deathless. And he sometimes refers to enlightenment as the deathless because once you get to enlightenment, you're no longer experiencing death. Instead, when this life comes to an end, we call that final enlightenment. We don't call it death because you're outside of the cycle of rebirth and you're now going to experience what's called final enlightenment, where the body and the mind are going to ultimately become detached. Because in this life, as an enlightened being, you will eliminate all your cravings, desires, attachments, where the mind will no longer experience any painful feelings. You will have eliminated all the discontent feelings, but you will still experience a muted amount of physical pain. If you stump your toe as an enlightened being, you're still going to know that you stumped your toe, and it's not going to feel good, but you're not going to be upset. You're not going to be angry. You're not going to be frustrated. You'll see that your mind will be completely calm and settled. You might even start laughing, but it's going to hurt. It's going to be painful. An enlightened being needs that little bit of pain. It's going to be muted compared to when you were off the path to enlightenment or prior to getting to enlightenment. It's going to be a muted amount of pain, because in the unenlightened state, when you stump your toe, for example, you're going to experience the physical pain, but then because your mind has a craving for permanent comfort of the body and you're not getting what you want, the mind's going to experience mental pain too. So it's like getting hit by two darts. But when you stump your toe as an enlightened being, you're only going to experience the physical pain. You won't experience the mental anguish that goes along with it. And you need this little bit of physical pain because as an enlightened being, if you were standing too close to a fire, for example, and you didn't feel that physical pain, the body would deteriorate and be destroyed without you even knowing it. So you still need just a little bit of that physical pain, but it's very muted and very minimal. So the Buddha refers to this state of enlightenment, as nibbana. He talks about it in all these ways, but he also calls it the deathless, because when you get to enlightenment and you die, this attachment between the mind and the body that's still producing this little bit of physical pain has been eliminated. That now that's been severed, and there's the breakup of the body and the mind, and now you've attained final enlightenment. There isn't actually death there. Because you're outside of the cycle of rebirth, you can't experience death. There's just the end of this life where this body can no longer sustain life. And now there's the separation of the body and the mind. Okay, so let me know what questions you guys have here before we get into dependent origination. This is just kind of helping you to be able to see that in order to get to accomplishment in view, in order to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment, you're going to need to know the dependent origination. That's what this whole chapter is helping you to be able to see. Okay, it looks like Lyndon has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I noticed somewhere they are not mentioned like ignorance, but some does. I'm just curious, why is that?
So he left it out here because a instructed noble disciple does not think when what exists does what come to be. With the arising of what does what arise. That missing thing that you would not be thinking about is the word ignorance. Right? So you would already know that ignorance is missing. But by the time he gets down here, he's using ignorance. Because he's saying the instructed noble disciple has wisdom about this that is independent of others. When this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. So here he's using exactly the dependent origination, because up here he's talking about it more as a question of what you wouldn't be thinking. So here you're cluing into that because you know ignorance is supposed to be there, so you know that that's supposed to be there. But down here he's not talking about it in the same way, so that's why he's including it. Looks like your mute's on. I don't know if... Okay, you're done? All right, so let me check one more time if we have any questions. I don't see any questions, so let's go to dependent origination. What we're going to do here, it looks like Vibhav's going to volunteer to read this. What we're going to do, Vibhav, is we're going to read this first part right here. If you can see my highlighting, we're going to read that and I'm going to teach that. And then we'll talk about each thing potentially individually, depending on how much you guys would like to go into it today. So go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Teacher David. Dependent origination is the law of nature. The stream enterer understands condition, the cause, the elimination, and the way leading to the elimination of condition. First discourse. Monks, with ignorance as condition, volitional formations come to be. With volitional formations and condition, consciousness. With consciousness as condition, name and form. With name and form as condition, the sixth sense basis. With the sixth sense basis as condition, contact. With contact as condition, feeling. With feeling as condition, craving. With craving as condition, clinging. With clinging as condition, existence. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair come to be. Such is the cause of this whole mass of discontentedness. And what, monks, is aging and death?
We're not going to go that far, Vibhav, just yet. Okay? All right, so thank you, sir. So here, this is dependent origination, showing you the 12 interlinking steps that leads from ignorance all the way to discontentedness. Okay? And there's a couple of ways that you can look at dependent origination in order to understand it. You can look at it as it's the 12 interlinking steps that's teaching you how beings come into the world. And these particular 12 interlinking steps happen over multiple lifetimes, but you can also look at it as this is what's actually occurring within one lifetime as well, leading to discontentedness. So I'm going to walk you through each one of these and help you to understand it. And then we can talk about each thing individually, because in order to be able to understand dependent origination, you need to have what's called wisdom of principle. What wisdom of principle is where you understand each one of these things individually. What is ignorance? What is volitional formations? What is consciousness? And so forth. And then you're going to also need to memorize what is wisdom of entailment. What wisdom of entailment is where you understand when one thing leads to another. So when you understand that ignorance leads to volitional formations, that's the linking between the two. That's called wisdom of entailment. But you need to first understand wisdom of principle. So let me explain that first. So ignorance is where the mind has this unknowing of true reality, where it lacks wisdom of how the world truly works. It doesn't understand the natural laws of existence. It doesn't understand things like the three universal truths or the four noble truths, the eightfold path. It doesn't understand the five precepts. It doesn't understand the natural law of dhamma, of cause and effect, and how the world you truly experience things in your day-to-day life. So this is that lack of wisdom or confusion or misunderstanding. The same thing that you've learned in the three poisons or the three unwholesome roots or the three fires. All of the times that I've ever been talking about ignorance, it's the same ignorance, that lack of wisdom, and that some people call it confusion or delusion or misunderstanding or misperception. The mind just doesn't understand what it doesn't understand. That's called wisdom of principle, if you understand what that is. Then what volitional formations are, these are your choices and decisions that you make. This is just a word that they used, volitional formations, but really what it means is choices and decisions, your day-to-day choices and decisions. What consciousness is this is the mind itself. That if we think about the mind like a cardboard box, that cardboard box is the consciousness. That's the mind. And each individual mind over each individual life is a different cardboard box. So the cardboard box is the consciousness or the mind. Name and form is a way of referring to the physical body. There's very detailed specific things that you can see down here inside of Dependent Origination where the Buddha describes it in detail. But what I suggest you do as you're getting familiar with Dependent Origination is when you see name and form, just think in your mind physical body. And here I'll just show you this. Oops. I got you muted there now, Vibhav. So I'm going to go down here so you can see name and form, so you can see the Buddha describing this, so you can have confidence that, yes, you can think of this now as the physical body. So when he talks about name and form, he calls it feeling, perception, volitional formations, contact, and consciousness. This is name. So this is 4 out of the 5 aggregates. And when he talks about a living being and what is a living being, he talks about the 5 aggregates or the 5 criteria of form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and a consciousness. So feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, those are 4 out of the 5 aggregates that make up a living being. Contact is what we were talking about in previous classes, where you have contact through the 6 sense bases. So this is what he's calling name. And then when he talks about form, he's talking about the 4 great elements. This is the earth, water, wind, and fire. This is how they described the physical body 2,500 years ago, where today we describe it through talking about atoms or cells or different things like this. They described it as the 4 elements back then. So whenever the Buddha is talking about the 4 great elements, he's talking about earth, water, wind, and fire, but that's the form. That's the physical form of the body. So for example, the earth element is the solids of the body, like your nails, your fingernails, your toenails, your teeth, your hair, your bones. This is the solids of the body. The water element are like your tears, saliva, urine, pus, things like this. This is the blood. That's the water element. The wind element is how things move in your body. So for example, the feces in the colon, that's the earth element. It's also got some water in there as well, but the movement of the feces through the colon is the wind element. Or the blood is the water element, but the movement of the blood through the vein is the wind element. And then we've got the fire element, which is associated with the temperature, oftentimes associated with digestion in the body. So if you study the 4 element theory, which you don't have to do in order to get to enlightenment, you would understand that he's talking about the physical body. That's what the fifth of the 5 elements, the 5 criteria, the 5 aggregates. That's the 5th one. So when we talk about what makes up a human being or any living being, the Buddha says the 5 aggregates, the 5 criteria of form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness. So up here under name, we've got 4 of those 5 aggregates. And now we've got the 5th aggregate here as form. So now you can think about name and form just as the physical body. That's the best way for you to do this, so that you don't have to dissect it to this level of detail. But just know that that level of detail is there should you ever need it. So when you are learning dependent origination for wisdom of principle, understand that name and form is the physical body. That's what you need to know. Then the 6 sense bases are the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and then the mind itself. Those are the 6 sense bases. Those are the ways that the mind experiences contact. That's the next thing, that the mind now experiences the contact through these 6 sense bases. That's how your mind experiences any aspect of the outside world. Then there's feelings. This is the pleasant feelings, the painful feelings, the neither painful nor pleasant, the conditioned feelings that are experienced in the unenlightened mind. Then there's the craving, which is the mind's longing, yearning for something, the seeking outside of yourself, the mind pulling in the direction of the objects of its affection. That's the craving. The clinging is where the mind now holds on to things, right? So in the other programs that I teach craving, desire, attachment. I teach about craving and clinging, all as one thing. But here you can see that it's actually separate. And I teach it as separate things once you get to this point, because you need to see that there's 2 aspects of what the mind is actually doing. There's the craving, there's the longing, yearning for it, but then there's the clinging to it. So for example, you might say you don't have a life partner and you don't have a boyfriend. Someone might think, oh, wow, I really wish I had a boyfriend. I really wish I had a girlfriend. If I just had a boyfriend or girlfriend, wow, life would be so much better. I just really want a boyfriend or girlfriend so bad. That's the craving, right? That's the longing, yearning. But then let's just say you get a boyfriend or girlfriend, and now you cling to it and you hold on to it. And now your mind is wanting that person to be permanent. Or say you're thinking, wow, if I just had more money, if I just had a lot more money, everything would be better in my life. I just want so much more money. That's the craving. That's the longing, yearning. But then when you get your money, now you cling to it and you hold on to it. So these are 2 different aspects of what the mind is doing that in the beginning classes, we just talk about it all as one because it's easier for you in getting started on the path. But now you can start to understand the granular detail that there's actually 2 aspects of the mind here. There's craving and clinging, which the craving is the longing, yearning outside of yourself. The clinging is the holding on and craving for it to be permanent. Then there's something called existence. Existence is where there's existence in a certain realm, that a being has come into existence, that we can now call this a being. Then there's birth, which is that being coming into the world, meaning like it's now outside the womb, for example, of a human being. So when the being is inside the womb, there is an existence, right? That being is in existence inside the womb. But once it comes out of the womb, it has now been birthed. It has now come into the world. So that's what birth is. Then there's aging and death, which I'm pretty sure you guys understand what that is, as the body ages and starts to deteriorate and ultimately get to death, where there's the end of this life. You understand aging and death. And then there's sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. This is the discontentedness, the painful feelings that the mind experiences based on conditions. And then you guys have understood discontentedness and what that is. Okay, so this is going through each one independently. And if you guys have read this, prior to class or you're planning to read it after class, you can see each one of these that the Buddha describes, what aging and death is. And he goes through each one of them. We probably aren't going to have time to study each one of these individually as part of this class, but if you have questions, you're more than welcome to ask me and I'll let you know some more details to help you with each one of these if you're having challenges to know what they are. So now, once you understand wisdom of principle, where you understand what each one of these things are, now we can talk about how they connect together and they lead to birth and they lead to sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair, all these other things afterwards, okay? So there's this ignorance or this unknowing of true reality that the mind experiences. And let's just say this is a previous life, that in a previous life there was a being who lacked wisdom, that they didn't understand the Four Noble Truths, they didn't understand the natural law of Dhamma, they didn't understand the 10 fetters and all these other things. And because of that, they made certain choices and decisions, ultimately choosing not to get to enlightenment. They might not even known that enlightenment existed. So when there was death in that existence, those volitional formations that they made in the previous life led to a consciousness in this new life, this new mind. Because there was ignorance in the mind, and there was unwise decisions that were made in a previous life, that previous mind still had craving, it still had anger, and it still had ignorance in the mind. So those were the conditions that through those decisions that they made led to this new consciousness. And now this new consciousness needed to find a name and form, a physical body. Because there's this consciousness that is in existence, it's got to find a body. So now that it's found a body, and now there's this mind, and now there's the physical body that's starting to grow inside the womb of the mother, now there's the 6 sense bases that start to grow. The eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and then the mind itself is already there, right? So these 6 sense bases. There's research that shows that this can happen as early as 2 weeks into the egg and the sperm coming together, that the 6 sense bases start to be formed. And then there's other research that puts it out farther than that, right? So it depends on, what science you're looking at and what research you're looking at, that it can be as early as 2 weeks or 6 weeks. And some people put it out even farther than that these 6 sense bases are starting to grow and mature inside the womb. Well, once those 6 sense bases start to come into existence, and there's already a mind, there's already a physical body, and these 6 sense bases are starting to be developed, there's now going to be contact through those 6 sense bases. And now when the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and the body and the mind start to experience contact, there's going to start to be feelings that are experienced. Pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. That's all happening inside the womb. Then there's a craving that starts to be formed. And the craving is the longing, yearning. And then once there's craving, there's going to be clinging, where the mind is now holding on, craving permanence. And now there's going to be a being that comes into existence. Inside the womb, there's an existence, that this being is now in existence. Then this being is going to be born into the world. And when we come out of the womb, there's now going to be aging and death. That's going to slowly start to occur as we deteriorate. And then there's going to be sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. This is why when we first come into the world, immediately we're sorrowful, right? Because we were inside the womb, we were hooked up to the placenta, we were getting everything pumped into us, we were just hanging out in mom's stomach all by ourselves, had this cushy life going on. Life couldn't have been better. We're just hanging out in this warm womb. All the food is coming in all by ourselves. We got the whole place to ourselves, unless there's a twin or a triplets or something else like that. We're in there hanging out, right? And next thing you know, labor comes along and we're pushed out into the world, or there's a C-section and we're brought out into the world. But right away, because of our craving and clinging, because of that craving and clinging, We're discontent right from the beginning because we're craving that permanence of being in the womb. So right away, there's sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. And this is why the baby is usually wrapped up and coddled into some type of device to make it feel like it's in the womb again, giving the mind what it wants, which is that permanence and being close to mom and hearing mom's voice and getting some milk and some food. And now the baby starts to calm down. It doesn't cry, right? Because its cravings are getting fulfilled, right? So this is how the whole mass of discontentedness comes to be. That because of a previous life where there was ignorance and this unknowing of true reality, there were unwise decisions. And those unwise decisions allowed craving, anger, and ignorance to continue to exist in the mind. The 10 fetters continued in the mind. That was what led to the consciousness being formed. That consciousness found a physical body. The 6 sense bases started to grow and develop inside the womb. They experienced contact in the womb. Then there were feelings like pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant, that were experienced. The mind starts to experience craving. There's more and more craving. There's more and more clinging. This being has come into an existence, and now it's born. And once it's born, it's going to experience aging and death. And then there's also going to be sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. So this is what brings a being into the world to experience discontentedness. The number one problem here is ignorance. If it wasn't for this ignorance or this unknowing of true reality, there wouldn't have been a new life. But because there's a lack of wisdom and there's this ignorance in the mind continues to make unwise decisions, which continues to lead to renewed existence over and over and over again, where there's a consciousness that keeps being formed because the mind continues to crave and cling, and it continues to experience sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. So when I teach craving, anger, and ignorance as part of the 3 poisons or the 3 unwholesome roots, one of the things that I share is that while we call it craving, anger, and ignorance, it's really because of ignorance that craving and anger continues in the mind. You can see that here, that it's because of ignorance that craving continues to exist in the mind. And because of that craving, it produces anger, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. All this other stuff is the interlinking steps to help you be able to see how one connects to the other to the other. So sometimes I think about this as like a math equation, that when you have ignorance along with craving and clinging, then the equation results in discontentedness. That's the output that is created. All these other things are showing you the interlinking steps to help you be able to see what's happening and what's transpiring. What you would like to do on this path to enlightenment in order to be able to eliminate this discontentedness, in order to be able to get rid of this sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair, and dismantle dependent origination, you've got to get rid of the first thing. Because what this is like dominoes that are falling. If the ignorance domino falls, it's going to crash into volitional formations, which is going to crash into consciousness and the name and form, which is the physical body, and so forth and so on. And it's going to lead to sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. But if there is no ignorance, if there's wisdom, then the mind being wise, it will make wise decisions to purify the mind. And now it won't lead to a renewed existence. So as you're cultivating more and more wisdom in the mind of how to eliminate craving and clinging, you'll start experiencing less and less discontentedness. And that's how you'll know that dependent origination is true. This is how you independently verify it. You can walk through each one of these things and you can see how your life, you're experiencing this within this life. But you can also independently verify this by the more wisdom that you cultivate to be able to purify the mind, and the wiser decisions that you're making with your volitional formations, those choices and decisions, it's leading to less and less discontentedness. That's what's helping you to be able to see that dependent origination is true. So let me pause here and see what questions you guys would like to go into detail. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Marcy and Vibhav has a question. So let me go to Marcy first. Go ahead, Marcy.
Thank you, Teacher David. So my question is, and I think you just touched on it a little bit, is that the volitional formation, the choices and decisions that is comes about from ignorance. Once someone becomes like an arahant or becomes enlightened, volitional formation then is kind of changed to wise decision making, and then that's what doesn't lead to the dependent origination continuing on. Am I correctly understanding that?
You will have dismantled dependent origination because there's no longer any ignorance. You're no longer going to experience unwise decisions, that it's not going to lead to that. So essentially, if you've got all these dominoes lined up, you've taken out the first domino, and it's not possible to knock over the second one. It's just not possible because the ignorance has been completely eradicated. So in this existence, you will still make choices and decisions as an enlightened being, but they're now going to be wise, and they're going to be through a purified consciousness. You're going to still have a name and form physical body. You're still going to have the six sense bases. You're still going to have contact, but you're not going to be experiencing conditioned feelings. There's not going to be any craving. There's not going to be any clinging. There is going to be this existence, but you'll be outside of the cycle of rebirth. There's not going to be any more birth. There is going to be continued aging, that this body is going to continue to deteriorate. But when we get to the end of this life, we don't consider it to be death. It's final enlightenment. And there won't be any more sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. So you'll still be experiencing some of these things, but the connection between them has been completely dismantled. So that's why you're not actually experiencing the sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair, because you've removed the interlinking steps between all of these things.
Thank you, Teacher David.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking for that answer.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It.
All right, so I think Vibhav, you didn't have any questions. I was just up from before, since you put your hand down. And looks like Alberto has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I have a question. I still struggle to see the cause and effect relations between consciousness and name and form.
Okay, so if there's a mind that is in existence, it's got to find a name and form. It's got to find a physical body to be able to come into existence, because it's not just going to be floating out there in the world. It's got to find a physical body somewhere. So while we talk about this in terms of the human life, the same thing is happening within the animal realm too, that they're experiencing the same exact thing. So it's either going to, depending on your gamma, that consciousness is going to need to find a physical body. In the case of being reborn in the animal realm, it's going to find an animal existence. In the case of a human existence, it's going to find a physical body of a human being. So it's going to come into the womb of the woman. So if you remember back to a previous discourse that we've been studying, where the Buddha talks about the union of three things that is needed in order for a being to come into existence. He talks about essentially that there needs to be an egg, there needs to be a sperm, and there needs to be a consciousness. That sets the stage for the name and form, is the egg and the sperm coming together. And once the egg and the sperm has come together inside the womb, that set the stage for name and form. And now this consciousness that is created, it now needs to come into and find a name and form.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So now, Vibhav, you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question on the craving part. Could you go down to when he describes craving? Yeah, so when a baby is in the womb, how do they have the craving for forms, or I guess they have craving for flavors because they're eating food? Like, how do they have craving for physical objects?
All of this stuff is still being experienced inside the womb because they have the six sense bases. So They have eyes, so they still are going to have a craving for form to see certain things. They have ears, so they're going to be able to hear sounds inside the womb. They have a nose, so they're going to have certain odors that they're experiencing. There's going to be certain flavors that are experienced on the tongue. They're definitely going to have craving for physical objects. That's that feeling of the tightness of the womb and the uterus that's coming around the baby, and they're experiencing physical contact through their body. Then they're going to have certain mental objects that are in the mind as well. So all of this is happening inside the womb, and you can see that. You've had children. You probably saw when they came out, they were crying, and then when they wrapped them up in the little blanket, now all of a sudden they feel comfortable again because they were experiencing the physical object of the blanket that was making their body feel tight because it felt like they were in the womb again. That's the craving for the physical object.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Okay, it looks like we have some questions coming in here on Zoom. This was from Marcy. Oh, okay. This is just her saying thank you. All right. Let me see if we have anything coming in anywhere else. Okay, so what I'll share just as an ending for dependent origination is I definitely recommend that you read this multiple times. I recommend that you read each one of these things that the Buddha is sharing, that you learn wisdom of principle, what each one of these things are, and you understand the interlinking connection. Like you should be able to memorize that it goes from ignorance to volitional formations, consciousness, name and form, six sense bases, contact, feeling, craving, clinging, existence, birth, aging, death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. This whole mass of discontentedness comes to be, right? You need to be able to remember that in your mind. So this is part of what helps you to develop your memory and your clarity of mind on the path to enlightenment, is that you're exercising the mind to be able to remember the teachings. You're going to need to be able to commit the Eightfold Path to your memory, and you're going to need to be able to commit dependent origination to your memory. So you're going to need to study this multiple times, and you're going to need to be able to independently verify this through your own practice, that as you're cultivating more and more wisdom and you're training your mind, you can see that your craving and clinging is reducing, and then you can see that your discontentedness is reducing as well. And if you've ever been involved around a being that is born, you can see how these interlinking steps are coming together as part of a birth. Okay, so this is something you're going to need to study more than one time. You know, this isn't the universal truth of impermanence that I can teach it for like 2 or 3 minutes. You can independently verify it within another minute or two, and you're done and off to the next thing. This is something you're going to need to most likely really sit with. Okay, so let's go to the next chapter, which is chapter 15. And by the way, there's different charts here if you guys haven't already seen this in the book that help you to understand it. There's a diagram that was created that's going to help you to be able to understand this as well. Okay, so this is essentially dependent origination. The Buddha's just describing it in a different way. He's talking about the elimination of this, and he's talking about it backwards. So I don't know that we need to go through this again because it's essentially what we were just talking about, and he's just doing it backwards. And then he has the wisdom of principle in here again for each individual thing. So let's get down here now to chapter 16. Chapter 16, we don't need to read this one either, because what the Buddha is talking about here is he's helping you to be able to see for each one of these individual aspects of dependent origination, you need to understand what it is. You need to understand the cause of it, which is the previous condition. You need to understand the elimination of it, which is to eliminate the previous condition, in the way leading to the elimination of this, and that is the Eightfold Path. That's what's leading to the elimination of that. So for example, the wisdom of aging in death is to understand that what aging and death is that the body is continually deteriorating, and it's going to lead to death. The cause of aging and death is birth. The elimination of aging and death is to eliminate birth. The way leading to the elimination of aging and death is the Eightfold Path, right? So now the wisdom of birth is to understand that that's a being coming into the world. The cause of that is existence. the elimination of that is to eliminate existence, and the wisdom of the way leading to the elimination of birth is to eliminate existence, right? So this is just a little bit beyond what we were just talking about, and the Buddha is explaining that you're going to need to know each one of these things in order to be able to understand dependent origination. And then once again, he goes through wisdom of principle for each one of these things, helping you to understand it. Okay, so we don't need to read all of this because it's quite extensive, but you can read this on your own. And if you have questions, let me know in this class or all the other ways that I help you guys. Now, under chapter 17, there's the 77 cases of wisdom, where it's taking the same thing and he's saying there's the wisdom of aging and death, that it has birth as its condition. There's the wisdom that when there is no birth, there is no aging and death. In the past, too, aging and death had birth as its condition. That's your past life. In the past, too, had there been no birth, there would have been no aging and death. In the future, too, aging and death will have birth as its condition, that if you continue to have ignorance in your mind, there's going to be this future life. And then in the future, too, should there be no birth, there will be no aging and death, right? And then that wisdom of the stability of the teachings is also subject to destruction, vanishing, fading away, and elimination. So that these teachings that the Buddha was sharing during his life, he was explaining to people like, hey, they're going to deteriorate. These teachings are not going to be vibrant in the world for all of eternity, that from his lifetime, they were going to deteriorate, right? So even the teachings themselves, right? So this is something that the mind can have that wisdom of. So he goes through each one of these things individually. So you'll just need to understand that this is taking dependent origination and understanding that if you don't dismantle dependent origination, there's going to be continued existence. That there was existences in the past, there's this existence now, and there's going to be existences in the future if dependent origination isn't completely destroyed by cultivation of wisdom, eliminating craving and clinging, and elimination of discontentedness. So that's what this whole discourse is helping you to see for each individual aspect of dependent origination. So now let's get to the next one, which is chapter 18. This one, let's see. Okay, I think what we can do, you know what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and read this one, because it's just restating some things, but kind of like in a certain way. Is there someone who would like to read this? But before we do this, let me just check. Do you guys have any questions on what I just shared in those discourses that I just kind of went over, helping you to understand what they are from a high level? Let me know if you have questions by putting that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. Okay, Alberto or Martha, go ahead, guys.
Thank you, teacher. Wisdom of the principle and wisdom of the entailment. A streamer entered. And what monks is aging and death? The aging of the various beings in the various orders of beings, their growing old, brokenness of teeth, grayness of hair, wrinkling of skin, declining of vitality, degeneration of the sense basis, this is called aging. The passing away of the various beings from the various orders of beings, their perishing, breakup, disappearance, mortality, death, completion of time, the breakup of the aggregates, the laying down of the carcass, this is called death. Thus, this aging and this death are together called aging and death. With the arising of birth, there is the arising of aging and death. With the elimination of birth, there is the elimination of aging and death. The Noble Eightfold Path is the way leading to the elimination of aging and death. That is, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. When monks, a noble disciple thus understands aging and death, its cause, its elimination, and the way leading to its elimination, this is his wisdom of the principle. By means of this principle that is seen, understood, immediately attained, attained, comprehended, he applies the method to the past and to the future. Thus, whatever aesthetics and Brahmins in the past directly knew aging and death, its cause, its elimination, and the way leading to its elimination, all this directly knew it in the very same way that I do now. Whatever aesthetics and Brahmins in the future will directly know aging and death, its cause, its elimination, and the way leading to its elimination. All this will directly know it in the very same way that I do now. This is his wisdom of entailment. When monks, a noble disciple has purified and cleansed these two kinds of wisdom of the principles and wisdom of entailment, he is then called a noble disciple. Who is accomplished in view? Who is accomplished in vision? Who has arrived at these true teachings? Who sees these true teachings? Who possesses a trainee wisdom? Who possesses a trainee true wisdom? Who has entered the stream of the teachings, a noble one, with penetrating wisdom, one who stands squarely before the door to the deathless enlightenment.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So here the Buddha is highlighting this particular factor or this condition of aging and death, but he does all of them this way. That he's explaining that for each one of these, you need to understand the wisdom of principle and you need to understand the wisdom of entailment. So you need to understand each individual aspect or condition of dependent origination, and you need to understand how one connects to the other. That's what you would like to work on. If you're still working on getting your Eightfold Path together and trying to practice that, stay with that, right? This isn't the time for you to necessarily go into studying dependent origination. For some of you guys, it might be the time to start studying dependent origination, but you need to know as an independent practitioner, when is the right time for you to make any particular steps on the path? Because in this program, you're going to be learning lots and lots of stuff over the next year and a half. But it doesn't mean you should go out and just start studying all of these things, because there's a lot of things. You need to know how to break it down into small little pieces. So if you haven't memorized the Eightfold Path yet, just stick with that. Work on memorizing the Eightfold Path. Don't put expectations on yourself. Don't pressure yourself to be able to learn all these other things. And now, as you're putting together the Eightfold Path, both memorizing it and also practicing it in day-to-day life, and that can take sometimes a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 or 5 years to even just get that together, right? And as you dial that in closer and closer, you're going to see your minds entering into the jhanas. And this is the time where, now that you've got the Eightfold Path well underway and you've got your arms around that, it's already committed to memory, and you've been practicing it for multiple months and years, and you see the improvement to your mind and your life. Now you're starting to experience the jhanas, and your mind's starting to experience those enhanced qualities of mind. That's when you would like to start focusing on dependent origination, because now you've already digested the Eightfold Path and you've got that well underway. So you're going to need to know, as an independent practitioner, where you are on the journey, so that way you're segmenting this and focusing on the things that you need to focus on at the appropriate time. And once you're ready, then you learn wisdom of principle and wisdom of entailment. It doesn't make sense to even get into this stuff if you haven't quite mastered the Eightfold Path yet. You really need to get that underway first. Okay, so any questions here on this chapter where the Buddha is highlighting this particular condition of aging and death, but you really need to understand wisdom of principle and wisdom of entailment for each individual condition of dependent origination. Okay, I don't see anything anywhere. All right, so now let's go to the next one, which is chapter 19. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, Samantha, go ahead, ma'am.
A stream enterer has abandoned confusion in the case of clinging to aggregates. Monks, when what exists, by clinging to what, by adhering to what, does such a view as this arise? The winds do not blow, the rivers do not flow, pregnant women do not give birth, the moon and sun do not rise and set, but stand as steady as a pillar. Venerable Sir, our teachings are rooted in the perfectly enlightened one. take recourse in the perfectly enlightened one. It would be good if the perfectly enlightened one would clear up the meaning of this statement. Having heard it from him, the monks will remember it. Then listen and attend closely, monks, I will speak. When there is form, monks, by clinging to form, by adhering to form, such a view as this arises. The winds do not blow, the rivers do not flow, pregnant women do not give birth, the moon and sun do not rise and set, but stand as steady as a pillar. In the case of feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, the discourses are identical except for the reference to each of the aggregates previously mentioned. What do you think, monks? Is form permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Venerable Sir. Is what impermanent discontentedness or peacefulness? Discontentedness, Venerable Sir. But without clinging to what is impermanent, discontentedness, and subject to change, could such a view as this arise? The winds do not blow, the rivers do not flow, pregnant women do not give birth, the moon and sun do not rise and set, but stand as steady as a pillar. No, Venerable Sir. In the case of feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, the discourses are identical except for the reference to each of the aggregates previously mentioned. That which is seen, heard, sensed, recognized, attained, sought after, and ranged over by the mind, is that permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Venerable Sir. Is what is impermanent discontentedness or peacefulness? Discontentedness, Venerable Sir. But without clinging to what is impermanent, discontentedness, and subject to change, could such a view as this arise? The winds do not blow, the rivers do not flow, pregnant women do not give birth, the moon and sun do not rise and set, but stand as steady as a pillar. No, Venerable Sir. One monks, a noble disciple, has abandoned confusion in these 6 cases, and one further, he has abandoned confusion about discontentedness, the cause of discontentedness, the elimination of discontentedness, and the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. He is then called a noble disciple who is a stream enterer, no longer bound to the netherworld, fixed in destiny, with enlightenment as his destination.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. So here you can see the Buddha is helping the students to be able to understand the aggregates and that they're impermanent. And this is an important development on the path. And these other things that he's talking about here too, that an individual would have developed these things to understand these questions. So if you read through this and you were maybe even said to yourself, no, Venerable Sir, before you even got to the end of it. That's what I usually do when I read these things. I'm thinking as if the Buddha is talking to me, and then I just answer his question. You might have actually said, no, Venerable Sir, before you even got to that. Then you're understanding these questions, because these are things that you learned as you were first learning about impermanence and things of this nature. So these are the 6 things, in addition to everything else that you've been learning, that a person who's in the first stage of enlightenment would understand. They wouldn't have this confusion about discontentedness, right? This is the Four Noble Truths, the cause of discontentedness, the elimination of discontentedness, and the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. They would abandon the confusion through those 6 things that the Buddha was just talking about, as well as the Four Noble Truths. So this is just one more aspect of having gotten to the first stage of enlightenment. So any questions here on this chapter, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. Okay, it looks like Lyndon maybe has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, yeah. My question is, why this 6 thing? Why is this 6?
So up here, he's talking about these 6 things. So here, he's saying, when what exists, by clinging to what, by hearing to what, does such a view as this arise? The wind does not blow, the river does not flow, pregnant women do not give birth, the moon does not rise and set, but stand as strong as a pillar. So these are the things that he's talking about that an individual wouldn't be confused about.
Got it. Is there anything special about this 6 things, or is just like something that he shared before?
What's helpful with it is that if you understand that this these things are not true, then you're understanding impermanence, that you understand the universal truth of impermanence. So if you thought that the wind does not blow, right, then that means that you think that there's a constant state of permanence with no wind. If you thought that the rivers do not flow and the water is just permanent, then you would think that. If you thought that pregnant women do not give birth, then you would think that they're just permanently looking like that. The sun and the moon don't rise, right? That means that they're just permanent. And they set and set, but instead they stand steady as a pillar. That means if you were confused about these things, then that means you don't understand the universal truth of impermanence. So he's just giving you examples. You know how like when I teach about the universal truth of impermanence, I say, think about this body. Does this body permanent or is it impermanent? What about your relationships? What about your bank account? What about the weather? So I go through all these different examples. And these are the examples that the Buddha was using to be able to help people see that the world is impermanent. And by the time that you are getting to this first stage of enlightenment, you would have already understood and you wouldn't be confused about these things, because you would know, of course, the wind blows, of course, the river flows, because these are all impermanent situations that are occurring. And of course, the moon and the sun rise and set and things like this.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, teacher.
Yep, you're welcome. Okay. I don't see any questions anywhere. So we'll go to the last chapter for today, which is chapter 20. Here, is there someone who would like to read this one? And it says a little bit longer of a chapter, but we can read this one. So it looks like Vibhav would like to read this one. Let me get to you, Vibhav. There you go.
Thank you. A stream enterer has abandoned confusion in the case of nothing matters. Monks, when what exists, by clinging to what, by adhering to what, does such a view as this arise? There is nothing given, nothing offered, nothing presented in charity, no fruit or result of wholesome and unwholesome actions, no this world, no other world, no mother, no father, no beings who are reborn spontaneously, no ascetics and Brahmins faring and practicing rightly in the world, who, having realized this world and the other world for themselves by direct knowledge, experience, make them known to others. This person consists of the four great elements. When one dies, earth returns to and merges with the earth body. Water returns to and merges with the water body. Fire returns to and merges with the fire body. Wind returns to and merges with the wind body. The sense bases are transferred to space. Four men with support for the body as the fifth carry away the corpse. The formal funeral speech lasts as far as the charnel ground. The bones whiten. Burnt offerings end with ashes. Giving is a doctrine of unwise. When anyone asserts a doctrine that there is giving and the like, it is empty, false, and frivolous speech. Unwise and the wise are like cut off and perish with the breakup of the body, and that after death they do not exist. Venerable Sir, our teachings are rooted in the perfectly enlightened one. Take recourse in the perfectly enlightened one. It would be good if the perfectly enlightened one would clear up the meaning of the statement. Having heard it from him, the monks will remember it. Then listen and attend closely, monks. I will speak. When there is form, monks, by clinging to form, by adhering to form, such a view as this arises. There is nothing given, nothing offered, nothing presented in charity, no fruit or result of wholesome and unwholesome actions, no this world, no other world, no mother, no father, no beings who are reborn spontaneously, no ascetics and Brahmins faring and practicing rightly in the world who, having realized this world and the other world for themselves, by direct knowledge experience, make them known to others. This person consists of the four great elements. When one dies, earth returns to and merges with the earth body. Water returns to and merges with the water body. Fire returns to and merges with the fire body. Wind returns to and merges with the wind body. The sense bases are transferred to space. Four men with support for the body as the fifth carry away the corpse. The formal funeral speech lasts as far as the charnel ground. The bones whiten, burnt offerings and end with ashes. Giving is a doctrine of unwise. When anyone asserts a doctrine that there is giving and the like, it is empty, false, and frivolous speech. Unwise and the wise are like cut off and perish with the breakup of the body. After death, they do not exist. What do you think, monks? Is form permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Venerable Sir. Is what is impermanent discontentedness or peacefulness? Discontentedness, Venerable Sir. But without clinging to what is impermanent, discontentedness, and subject to change, could such a view as this arise? There is nothing given, nothing offered, nothing presented in charity, no fruit or result of wholesome and unwholesome actions, no this world, no other world, no mother, no father, no beings who are reborn spontaneously, no ascetics and Brahmins faring and practicing rightly in the world who, having realized this world and the other world for themselves by direct knowledge, make them known to others. This person consists of the four great elements. When one dies, earth returns to and merges with the earth body, water returns to and merges with the water body, fire returns to and merges with the fire body, wind returns to and merges with the wind body. The sense bases are transferred to space. Four men with support for the body as the fifth carry away the corpse. The formal funeral speech lasts as far as the charnel ground. The bones whiten, burnt offerings end with ashes. Giving is the doctrine of unwise. When anyone asserts the doctrine that there is giving and the like, it is empty, false, and frivolous speech. Unwise and the wise are like cut off and perish with the breakup of the body. After death, they do not exist. No, Venerable Sir. In the case of feeling, perception, volitional formation, and consciousness, the discourses are identical except for the reference to each of the aggregates previously mentioned. That which is seen, heard, sensed, recognized, attained, sought after, and ranged over by the mind is what permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Venerable Sir. Is what is impermanent discontentedness or peacefulness? Discontentedness, Venerable Sir. But without clinging to what is impermanent, discontentedness, and subject to change, could such a view as this arise? There is nothing given, nothing offered, nothing presented in charity, no fruit or result of unwholesome and unwholesome actions, no this world, no other world, no mother, no father, no beings who are reborn spontaneously, no ascetics and Brahmins faring and practicing rightly in the world who, having realized this world and the other world for themselves by direct knowledge, make them known to others. This person consists of the four great elements. When one dies, earth returns to and merges with the earth body. Water returns to and merges with the water body. Fire returns to and merges with the fire body. Wind returns to and merges with the wind body. The sense bases are transferred to space. Four men with support for the body as the fifth carry away the corpse. The formal funeral speech lasts as far as the charnel ground. The bones whiten. Burnt offerings end with ashes. Giving is a doctrine of unwise. When anyone asserts a doctrine that there is giving and the like, it is empty, false, and frivolous speech. Unwise and the wise are like cut off and perish with the breakup of the body. After death, they do not exist. No, Venerable Sir. When monks, a noble disciple has abandoned confusion in these 6 cases, and when, further, he has abandoned confusion about discontentedness, the cause of discontentedness, the elimination of discontentedness, and the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness, he is then called a noble disciple who is a stream enterer, no longer bound to the nether world, fixed in destination, with enlightenment as his destination. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Vibhav. So this is similar to the previous discourse, but the Buddha is going into more detail here of these 6 things. And essentially what he's leading to is making sure that an individual understands that in order to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment, you're going to need to understand what is the universal truth of impermanence. And of course, the Four Noble Truths. Those are things that you would have learned very early in your development on the path. Those are the first things that the Buddha would teach someone. But these are discourses that help people to understand that, hey, if you're even interested in getting to the first stage of enlightenment, you're going to need to understand these things. So that's what he's helping you to be able to see here in a more detailed way than even the previous discourse. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like.
I have a question on this part where it talks about the 4 great elements.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, he's saying that the person is made of, the doctrine is that the person consists of the 4 great elements, and when they die, all the elements return to where they come from.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess this is true even for. So what is wrong with this doctrine in this case? Like what is the missing piece here?
What do you mean, what is the missing piece?
So he's saying that if a person holds this view that, like he's saying that, right? There's the people who adhere to this particular view that there's nothing given, nothing offered, nothing presented charity, no fruit, and then is he also saying that when one dies, the other turns into and merges with the other body, or this is separate, or this is the doctrine that someone holds on to?
So here he's saying, what exists by clinging to what, by adhering to what, does such a view as this arise? The view is there is nothing given, nothing offered, nothing prescribed in charity, no fruit or result of wholesome and unwholesome actions, meaning that you don't understand the natural law of Dhamma. No this world, no other world. That means that there's no such thing as the cycle of rebirth in the 5 realms. No mother, no father, no beings who are reborn spontaneously. That's also about the cycle of rebirth. No ascetics or Brahmins faring and practicing rightly in the world. That means that you don't have the wisdom to be able to determine whether people are actually practicing wisely or unwisely. Who, having realized this world and the other world for themselves by direct knowledge or experience, make them known to others. So meaning there is no people who understand the cycle of rebirth, the 5 realms of existence, and that they're not making that known to others in terms of cultivating the wisdom to get to enlightenment. This person consists of 4 great elements, so that this person is only existing of these 4 great elements, right? Now, when one dies, all these elements return back to these places to, it basically disintegrates. The carrying away of the corpse, the formal funeral speech lasts as far as the charnel grounds, the bones whiten, burnt offerings end with ashes, and then this last one is giving is a doctrine of unwise, meaning that they don't understand the generosity is part of the path to enlightenment. They say that, practicing generosity is unwise. So if you have this view, then that means that you don't fully understand, because it's not just the 4 great elements, that this body is not the only part of this being. There's a mind as well. So if you think that it's only these 4 great elements that makes up this being, then you have not acquired fully the understanding of the right view or accomplishment in view to be able to make your way to enlightenment.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have a question also here from Andrew. He says, I have a question about the source of these discourses in your books. What or whose translation to English from the original Pali Canon are the discourses in your books borrowed from? Or do you have an English translation of the Pali Canon where you selected these from for your inclusion in your books? So you will not find any translations anywhere in the world that are exactly the same as what I'm sharing. These translations are unique to what I'm sharing. The baseline translations of the Pali to English were done by Bhikkhu Bodhi, who is known as one of the foremost translators of Pali to English. But then I've updated the word choices because there were certain word choices that were very difficult and challenging for people to be able to understand. So I needed to clarify those word choices for people. But you won't find these translations anywhere else from outside of what I'm sharing. So this is what I'm sharing. In terms of the individual discourses that I'm sharing, the baseline of that came from a book series that I acquired here in Thailand, that they actually took the 45 volumes of books of the Pali Canon and they sectioned it off into individual discourses, and they created 13 books out of it. And there were certain discourses from those books that I included. There were certain ones that I didn't include. And then there were certain discourses that I included that I knew that people would need in order to get to enlightenment that are in this book series that aren't in that original book series. So what I'm sharing is unique for the collection of teachings that I'm sharing, but there's been some preliminary work that other communities of people or other individuals did that allowed me to be able to now put together and assemble this collection of teachings that I share. Okay, let me see if there's any other questions anywhere. I don't see any other questions anywhere. Okay, so what I'll do then is I'll just end by thanking you like I typically do. Thank you for your interest to learn and understand the teachings of the Buddha. Next week, we're going to be in the next 10 chapters, but keep in mind what I shared with you earlier, that even though we're progressing forward and you're learning new things, you need to understand where you are on the path and what it is that you really need to be studying and paying attention to in your practice. Because you can actually study in this program, but still be continuing to work on the Eightfold Path, for example. And maybe you're taking in some new understanding, but you're really focusing the most on the Eightfold Path, and that might be where you're at. So you need to know where you're at on the path as an individual student and an individual practitioner. So we're going to be in those next 10 chapters of chapters 21 through 30 in volume 5. Tomorrow in the group learning program, I'm going to be in volume 1, chapter 18, which is titled God's Creative Actions, You Have Free Will. This is where you learn about this being of God, because oftentimes people think that the Buddha didn't teach about this being, but that's actually not true. He did teach about this being. I'm going to be teaching you how to get to enlightenment either with a relationship with this being or without a relationship with this being. But depending on what you've learned, there's certain things that you might need to understand in order to be able to either get to enlightenment with a relationship with this being or without a relationship with this being, because oftentimes people are confused and have misunderstanding about this being. So that's chapter 18 for tomorrow as part of our group learning program. And then you can see all of our other programs and things like that on our website. So feel free to let me know if you have any questions about any of those. So thank you all for participating. Thank you for reading. Thank you for your questions. And perhaps I'll see you guys in a future class. Be well and take care. Sawadee-ka.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.